just so we don't
I'll
sit
do
there
it.
and go. Okay.
Welcome to Pinterest for Podcasters. Jana and I are back again this week, and we are talking about how to use Pinterest to promote your podcast. Jana, you talk about this quite often, actually, and you have a lot of clients and people in your sphere who are podcasters.
Yeah,
So,
for sure.
what do you think about Pinterest for podcasting?
Yeah, I think it can be an awesome strategy for, attracting more new listeners and for reminding your existing community when you have new episodes as well. And also an excellent strategy for leveraging the fact that if you're creating episodes once a week or twice a month or whatnot, generally people do a lot of promotion for like their most recent episodes, which is great. But Pinterest, because of the nature of Pinterest being evergreen and how the way Pinterest works is that people can find your pins when they're searching for those topics for months and years, makes it a really good place to be able to continue getting new people finding not only your brand new episodes that you're busy promoting, but also all your old episodes as well. So the idea that you're building this body of work through your podcast is great. But if you only have people coming and listening to your most recent episode and not discovering your older episodes through search engines like Pinterest, then you're missing out, right, on like all of this extra discovery, like people finding you and the opportunity really to leverage all that back content that you have been so busy and hard at work creating. So for all those reasons, I think it's an awesome strategy. Really good for coaches that have podcasts, course creators that have podcasts. Do digital product sellers, Heather, who you work with a lot, I think I've seen a lot of digital product sellers that have podcasts as part of their promotion strategy. Is that true?
People who have gone the route of, and this is what I've just noticed, is people who have podcasts who've gone the route of coaching in their space or doing thought leadership in their space, and they also sell digital products, will have podcasts. And it doesn't even necessarily, like, it's not always like your standard podcast that you put on Stitcher or Apple Podcasts. Sometimes it's like TikTok lives that they then repurpose. So my words are not with me today. The moral of this whole thing is exactly what Jana said, is to essentially park your content on Pinterest so it can be found for years. But one of the caveats to that is, even though we do podcasts and social media posts and blog posts and videos that sometimes are not evergreen, the majority of content, and let me know if you think this is true, for searchability should be evergreen.
Yeah. And so if someone so just kind of backing up a little bit, we talked about this last week, maybe, or the week before, how one of the mistakes we see sometimes people make is they pin things that are not evergreen. And it's like, oh, I'm doing a masterclass next week, and it's a one-time event, and I'm going to put a pin on Pinterest for it. And there's problems with that. One of them being that when someone finds that a month later or a year later or whatnot, it's no longer going to be valid. And that's frustrating. And it doesn't serve us, right? It's not like a good use of our time and effort. And there's other problems with it too. But so if you have a podcast and you know that you're creating, most of your episodes are evergreen, but every once in a while, maybe you go through a 1 month period where you're launching. And so your podcast is really focused on things that are not truly evergreen, then maybe you don't pin those episodes. Although usually, even when I see like coaches launching, for example, and they're using their podcast as a launching tool, they're still creating like evergreen value, if that makes sense. Like the value of what they're sharing is still evergreen. But it's like the calls to action may not be as evergreen. So it is something to consider, though. You're right. Like if you're going to make Pinterest a big part of your podcast promotion, you may want to think about having at least some, maybe most of your calls to action be more evergreen. So for example, if you want to learn more on this topic, I have a, masterclass that you can attend, and it's pre-recorded, like a webinar funnel type of situation that you're getting people into. Whereas if you're someone who launches like a new thing every 3 months or so, and you're doing like a lot of like workshops, maybe that's your offer, and they're all live and they're not something people can get later on again, like the replays, to purchase the replays or something, then maybe Pinterest isn't the best strategy, because whenever people go over and listen to your podcast from Pinterest, they may be listening to a lot of older episodes and then hearing your calls to action, which are no longer like relevant or they're not able to follow those calls to action because they're just not there anymore, right? So yeah, hopefully this is making sense. Thinking about whether Pinterest fits into your strategy and the way you do things is important. I agree. It's a good point.
So we have 4 tips for you today. If you are a podcaster, Jana, you're a little frozen. Stop your video for just a second. And then I'm sure your latency will catch up. Hi, Aubrey. Hi, Joy. So today we have 4 tips for podcasters that are wanting to utilize Pinterest for marketing. There you are. You're all caught up now. Move your face. There you are. Okay. So out of our 4 tips, Jana, I would love to hear your first one.
Okay. Where should we start? Okay. I think this is good. This is good, like a pretty practical one. So if you're considering using Pinterest for your podcast, or maybe you're already using Pinterest to promote your podcast, but maybe you're not seeing the results that you want yet, one thing you want to look at is one thing that you want to know about doing this, about this strategy, is that you want to make sure you have a really good board strategy. And I see this happening a lot. Like, this is one of the mistakes that I think some people who have podcasts particularly make. It's not exclusive to people with podcasts, but it's definitely one that I see a lot of them make for some reason. And I'll look at their, like, I'll see a pin on Pinterest and I can tell it's for a podcast episode. And I go and I look and it's on a board called like Heather's podcast, or it's on a board called like the, Synergy in Sales podcast, or the, something like that. And so even if the name of your podcast itself is SEO friendly, which is a great idea if you have a podcast when you're naming it, to think about it being SEO friendly. Not all of them are, and that's okay if it's not. But even if yours is, you still want to have a Pinterest board strategy. You don't just want to have one board on your Pinterest profile where you put all your podcast episodes. Mm-hmm. And this comes back to keyword strategy. So we've talked a lot on this show, the weekly Heather and Jana show, used to be on Clubhouse, now it's on YouTube Live, about how important your keyword strategy is. And your keyword strategy is what informs your board strategy. So the way that I teach it, you do your keyword strategy, you develop your master keyword plan, and then you decide on your board titles and topics based on your keyword plan. And board titles and your board descriptions should have keywords in them. And so let's say you have let's say you're a health coach and you have, because, I always talk about health coaches because I have a lot of health coaches in my audience and I help a lot of health coaches. Let's say you have a podcast that's all about, we always talk about gluten-free for some reason. We're like obsessed with gluten-free and dairy-free everything. Trying to think of another example because you're all probably like sick of hearing Heather and I
you're gluten-free and I'm dairy-free.
Dairy-free. So let's say that I'm just going to go with it. Let's say you have a gluten-free, a podcast about gluten-free lifestyle or something. And you have, you want to have at least 5 boards and maybe upwards of even like 10 or more boards that you've specifically keyword optimized to put your episodes on. So if you look at all your past episodes, or if you don't have a lot of past episodes yet, look at your plan, right? Like in high leverage content, I teach a method where you plan out like the next 20 pieces of content, right? And you can use this for your podcast. Yep. Look at that list of those topics and think, what are the common themes? What are the things like, is it like gluten-free cooking is one of them. Gluten-free for kids is maybe one of your themes that you do a lot of episodes about. Or maybe you don't talk about kids. Maybe you do gluten-free travel, right? Maybe that's another one of your kind of content pillars, if you will, or buckets. So think about what those commonalities are, use those to do your keyword research, and then use those to inform your board strategy. And that way, when you do an episode that's about gluten-free travel tips, finding the right places and all that kind of stuff, you can put that on your gluten-free travel board. And when you're doing something that's more about like gluten-free kids stuff, you can put that on your gluten-free kids board. And for anyone who's like new to Pinterest, there's a lot to, there's more than we can talk about in this episode, obviously. And Heather and I both have more, resources where you can go learn Pinterest, obviously. Like I have a course, Heather has her membership. But essentially what you need to understand for this part of the conversation is that whenever you pin something, when you put it on a board on your profile, the metadata or the words that you've used, the keywords to describe to Pinterest what the board is about, the board title and the board description, are part of what Pinterest considers when Pinterest is kind of deciding, if you will, who to show that pin to, right? So if someone's searching for something like how to find gluten-free restaurants when you travel, that might be, I mean, we can look and see if that's being searched, but like gluten-free restaurants, Italy or something like that. Whew, that'd be rough, right? Gluten-free in Italy. I was just talking to my friend, Chiara, who's a Pinterest strategist
I love
who
Kiara.
lives in Italy. Yes,
Mhm.
she's in your membership, right?
Mhm.
She's in your membership. Yeah, she's a friend of mine and also in my course, in my high leverage content course. And she's in Italy and asking me if I ever visited. And one thing that went through my mind, and she's probably going to kill me if she hears this, is like, I don't know if I can go to Italy because I'm gluten free. But anyway, sorry, I digress. Point is, bring it back. You want to make sure you're being as specific as possible with giving Pinterest information about what your pins are about. And one way you do that is put it on a relevant board, not just pop it on any board that's called Jana's podcast, or even Jana's gluten-free podcast is not specific enough, as far as I'm concerned, for a board strategy. So for some reason, podcasters do this a lot where they just have like one catch-all board for their podcast pins, and you shouldn't do that. That's the number one thing, maybe in terms of order of importance, but the first tip, the first of 4 things we're sharing that you need to know is that you need a board strategy, and you need to have more than one board where you're putting your Pinterest pins. So hopefully that makes sense. That was a lot, but
I have a thought as to why podcasters do this, and I would love your interpretation. But so many podcast platforms are really not very searchable, and you have to get your audience to the podcast player. And then once they're there, they can listen to all your podcast episodes. But my experience across multiple different podcast players, and I've tried many, the best one being Spotify, is that they are not very search friendly. You can find a few podcast episodes with the word gluten-free in Italy in the title, but all the podcasts with the metadata in the description of the podcast aren't even populating there. So it's almost like podcasters are not trained by their podcast platforms to be very searchable. And then they're also, which comes to your second example, I won't give it away, what happens after they publish the podcast live, they're not really encouraged to do search marketing.
Yeah.
So they're not in that
you.
frame of mind.
I know what you're talking about. Yeah. I think you're absolutely right. It's just the way, it's not part of it's not a big discussion in the podcast world or culture. But it's like anything else, like just because everybody else isn't necessarily doing it or talking about it or valuing it, that doesn't necessarily mean that it's not worth doing. Because if you do it, right, if you decide to be the one who's going to actually take the time to understand Pinterest as a platform and how powerful it can be to get new listeners, new subscribers who are really interested in your topics already, but don't already know that you exist, which is what Pinterest is great for. If you take the time to do it, it's a place where it's not as crowded, right? So everybody else isn't doing it, but that can be a good thing. And it can mean that you can be the one that is doing it, and you can have something that's your own that works well for you that not everyone is doing. So,
and because we've talked about this before, if you get really good at using Pinterest keywords and just the Pinterest marketing platform as a whole, we've said this before. One of our friends from Clubhouse, I can't remember her name now. Maybe you remember, Paula, always said that Pinterest made her a better marketer.
Yeah.
And I really think that is true, because I started mainly in Pinterest. I started with a blog, but then I really dug into Pinterest, and everything has come through that lens. And writing copy and headlines and descriptions or metadata has really gotten better for me over the years because of every little thing that comes with Pinterest. So I think if you do really a good job with search and identifying how people are actually looking for that podcast episode, it could even make you a better podcaster on your platforms and making your podcast more optimized for search.
Yeah, definitely.
Katie has a question, but you finish your thought and then I'll ask you Katie's question.
Okay. Yeah. I mean, I was just thinking about that. Reminds me of my Pinterest intensives. So the intensive session that I offer is a Pinterest setup, right? And it's a big part of it is doing the keyword research together and developing the keyword plan. That's like one of the big deliverables for that session. And it's so interesting because everyone comes to that session wanting the results that I promise, which is we'll have your Pinterest strategically set up. But everybody leaves it going like, oh my God, learning how to search in the search bar makes me understand my audience better, because I'm constantly saying to them like, well, do you think that people are really searching for dating mindset? Maybe not. Maybe they're searching more for dating profile ideas or, so yeah, totally. It's like, I think doing search marketing in general just really help it forces you to really turn the tables and get out of your own head and think about it from the perspective of what's my audience looking for when I want them to find me. And that's such a different way of thinking about it. So, okay, question.
Katie's question says, should you still have a board specifically for the podcast in addition to pinning to other boards? This is the best of board question.
Yeah. I mean, I say no these days. I don't think that you need a best of board. It's not a bad thing if you decide you'd like to do that. You could put one on there. If it's helpful for you because you like to link it from your email or something like that. But the one caveat would be, and Heather, you know what I'm going to say. You know what I'm going to say?
Yeah, go ahead.
Make sure the first time you pin the episode, you pin it to the topic specific relevant board. Don't put it on your best of board first, and then later on put it on your topic specific board. Pin it for the first time whenever you pin a new image to the board that it's relevant for. And yes, that means that even if you have other pins on that board that are other people's pins, or even if you have pins in that board that have nothing to do with your podcast, you're putting it on a board that's relevant for the episode. So if the episode is about gluten-free travel in Italy or gluten-free travel in Northern Italy, and you're going to do another episode on gluten-free travel in Southern Italy, put it on the board that's specifically for gluten-free travel, not on your general board first and then later on the gluten-free travel board.
I never really considered using a brand board for maybe sending your email list to Pinterest or, embedding that in blog posts or whatever, like, follow us on Pinterest or whatever. Here's my board. I've never really considered doing that, but I could see where it could get people there.
Yeah. Yeah. I think some people
internal. Oh, sorry.
Exactly. Oh, okay. Hopefully I'm back. That's exactly what you were saying. It's more of an internal, like if it's helpful for you for an internal process of some kind, then go for it. But it's kind of an outdated strategy. And again, it's not like if you do it, people are going to be like, oh my God, that's outdated. No one cares or knows except us. But we just don't think it works as well as, people think it does or it used to or something. It's better to put it on the board that's the most relevant for it.
Yeah.
And when we say it's better, we mean it'll get found by more people who are looking for that topic. And that's what we want when you put it on the topic specific board.
Exactly. And it's going to help Pinterest to index, which is the whole point of doing it. That's really ultimately what it's for, is to index the pins based on the SEO and based on the topic to the right people and the right search terms in the file cabinet. So I think that's really ultimately what you want. You just want to make sure you do that. So if you want to have a best of board, I think I might have one. I have some clients suggest, and this is Joy B, pin with me, and that has worked very well. Very nice. Joy's a Pinterest strategist, so I think I would definitely take Joy's input there.
Yep, she's a good one.
Okay, so some big podcasters are doing it, so I wasn't sure. Well, Katie, that's because they haven't followed our advice. So send them our YouTube video and then they'll stop doing it. Or maybe they won't. They just need to hire me or you. Okay, moving on to thought number 2. And that is a question that I get quite often. So a lot of podcasters want people to listen to their podcasts, and they're always wondering, well, where do I send them? So Jana, where do we send them?
I think Mimi asked that question, right?
Mimi did ask that question. She says, I'm excited for this one. Where should the pin be linking to? Directly to the podcast, to our website, or does it really matter?
Yep. Okay, so are we on? I guess we're on number 2, right?
We're on number 2, and okay. I'm thinking in my mind, it makes sense for you to cover this one, so I can cover.
Yeah.
I can go next.
Yeah. So the answer is it does matter. Yes, for sure. So I wish that I could say it doesn't matter and you should just do either one and it'll be great. But I do think that it is a more effective customer journey from Pinterest to send your pinners to show notes on your website. And there are a few reasons for that. And I actually have a blog post on my blog that will link in the show notes that is 7 ways to make your podcast show notes more Pinterest friendly. So this is a whole topic in and of itself, but there's a couple of key reasons. Number one is Pinterest does still prioritize pins that go to claim domains. So generally speaking, they're not going to distribute pins as widely if they're going to places that aren't your claim domain. So if I have a podcast, I don't have a podcast, but if I did, instead of having it go to my podcast player URL where someone could just hit play and listen on their phone, if it's going to janaomedia.com/podcast, episode 32 / gluten-free in Italy, Pinterest does prefer that. And when I say prefer, I mean like they're more likely to distribute that pin more widely. It doesn't mean they don't distribute pins that don't go to claim domains, but we've just all noticed over the years, and it's never really changed, that they will distribute it, generally speaking, more widely if it's going to your claim domain. And then more importantly, well, I don't know if it's more importantly, but the other big sort of dynamic with this is that when Pinterest, so one of the things we love about Pinterest, and you will love this if you're a podcaster and you're doing Pinterest for your podcast, is that it helps us get discovered and found by new people. I mentioned that already, right? So it's new people searching for things that are the things that we create content about in our podcasts. And they don't know us yet. They don't know that our podcast even exists. They're going to soon, and we're going to become their new favorite. But in order for them to find us, we have to make our pins, discoverable. And that's what we're talking about here. So people discover them through search and they find you, but they don't know you yet. And you have to pretty much assume. I mean, some people will already know you, but a lot of the people that find you will find you because they're new to you and they found you in search. So we have to think of them as a little bit of a colder audience. And it's just not really, there isn't as much precedent on Pinterest over the years that it's been around for people to land on your podcast player and be willing to hit play and commit to, listening to your 20 to 30-minute episode. Whereas Pinterest pinners are used to landing on show notes, being able to skim visually to see what is in the show notes so they can see the value, because you can't skim a podcast episode. I mean, you can kind of skim the description, but it's a little different. And being able to skim and then saying, yes, I will spend my next, 10 minutes reading these show notes and then reading through them. And you can take them on a little bit more of a journey that way, if that makes sense. So maybe in 5 years, this will be different. But for now, I do still think we live in a Pinterest era where Pinterest pinners, because this is a little bit of like a blue ocean strategy, it's like something that not a lot of podcasters are doing yet, which again is a good reason why you might want to do it. But we need to acknowledge that pinners are used to landing on something on your website that is sort of blog style. And I think most experts on any platform, Instagram, LinkedIn, TikTok, whatever, and most podcast producers as well, will tell you that show notes just help in general with conversion and helping you leverage your podcast to reach the goals, the reasons why you started your podcast. But I think it is especially important with Pinterest pinners because a lot of them are going to be new to you when they find you. Again, we love that because we want to be discovered by new people. That's why we're thinking about a search engine. One of the reasons we're thinking about a search engine for promoting the show. But it has that kind of that other side of that coin where we have to realize that we need to kind of like lay out that path in the way that they are expecting so that they stay with us and continue to, engage with our content rather than just bouncing back to Pinterest when they realize that they just landed on an audio podcast and there's nothing to read, right? So,
I
or
would
skim.
love to hear your thoughts on this. And this is obviously very me focused, but I cannot think of a time where I went out and looked for a podcast, even other new podcasts to me, that I intentionally went and listened to that I didn't already know about, either from someone else, it was recommended by someone that I trust. Because podcasting to me is so personal. It's almost intimate.
Mhm.
You're in my ears, you're in my car. This is a safe space for me. And I don't normally invite podcasters into that space unless I've heard about them before from someone I trust, read about them in a book, saw them on a social media channel being talked about by someone that I know. And I know that this may not hit for everybody. Maybe people are just actively looking for different podcasts to listen to that are new to them. But I, being the type of podcast listener that I am, and I wonder if this could be why Pinterest pinners prefer to read first and then they convert to listeners, is because that whole new to me thing, and there's just not a level of trust there that you're actually going to take 30 minutes out of your day to listen to someone that you've never come across yet.
Yeah, I think you're absolutely right. I think you hit on it, that you described kind of what I was describing it kind of from the marketing perspective, and you just described it from like the consumer behavior perspective. So that was, yeah, I agree with you entirely. And I think that this kind of brings us to something that I think you want to talk about. So this might be a good segue to thing three of four that we want you to know if you're listening to this episode to learn more about whether Pinterest could help you promote your podcast and get more listeners and subscribers, which is that, I think people actively search out new podcasts to listen to? Maybe sometimes, but moreover, people are willing to listen to a podcast and they get hooked on it because the episode that they start with solves a problem that they have or is on a fascinating topic, a topic that's fascinating to them. So like today, I actually listened to a new podcast episode from a brand new podcaster that I had never heard of. And the reason for that is that I saw her in a summit lineup. I thought her summit topic sounded really interesting. I did not opt into the summit, but I went to find her on Instagram, and in her top 9 grid, she had an episode pinned that was like, ooh, that's really interesting. And I want to go listen to it. I think it was something about how to connect like deeply with your audience in the ChatGPT era. I was like, oh, I want to know what she says about that.
Yeah.
And I went and I listened to it and it was great. Now I'm subscribing to her podcast. So I think that's the thing, is that that's it, is that we look for podcasts. We look for content, I think, that helps us with problems we have or reach goals. And then it could be a podcast. If we love listening to a podcast, we see it and we're like, oh, it's perfect. And it's a podcast and I love listening to podcasts. So I'm definitely gonna subscribe. Yeah.
I think there are vastly different camps there are obviously vastly different camps of people who like to listen to learn, like to watch videos to learn, like to read to learn, all of those different learning styles, but also personality wise, I am more unwilling to listen to a podcast from someone I've never heard of. I would listen to that podcast you just mentioned because if you told me that it was good, I trust you.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
I would be willing, because I've stayed in your home and we're very good friends and we talk all the time, to trust your judgment that would be a safe place for me to go.
Well, and we share values too. Like sometimes we don't want to support certain kinds of businesses. So we're kind of like, like, what's she all about? Yeah.
So I think that leads into point number 3 really well, which is after you lead them from Pinterest, and this is kind of like a riff on Jana's like, where do we send them question from Mimi, the Pinterest funnel. Something I get often is, how do we convert them to like beyond readers to listeners, or how do we really convert them into our world? If pinners are cold to us and now they're coming to our website and they've never heard from us before, I think that's why show notes are so important. It's also not only important for listeners for conversion, but it's also important for SEO for Google, to get your podcast on Google, get more people into it. And the more people that see your podcast and engage with your content, the more you're going to be served. All of that stuff is really good. But then how do we bring them deeper into our world, into our business? How do we build them from just listeners in an audience? If you're picturing like you're sitting in a play and it's dark and there's a spotlight on the audience and you can't see them, but they can see you. It's kind of like that philosophy of how do we bring them out of just being an audience to being a community member. And this one Jana's going to love. It is, to me, getting them on your email list and then really bringing them deeper into your email list, and from your email list, pushing them over to your Facebook group. From your Facebook group, we're pushing them out to social media channels or blog posts.
Just to be clear, you're not saying you need a Facebook group. You're just saying that's an
No.
example of one path that you could set up.
Example.
Right? Yeah.
If you can picture kind of a flywheel, or a wheel just moving, that centripetal force of, we move them from our website to the email list to the next thing, to the next thing, and we just bring them through this flywheel in our world. If you can get them to your website, and then your website copy, blog post copy, does a really good job of converting them to your email list.
What's going on over there?
I must have a bird on the roof. I've never heard that in the 10 months I've been in this office. That was weird.
Well, that's good. That sounds harmless. So that makes me happy. Because at first I was like,
it freaked me out there for a second, because we do get pack rats on our roof, on our house roof here, and you can always hear them scurrying around at nighttime.
I have a pack rat in my house too.
Not a pack rat. Well, my pack rat's not a human.
Okay, sorry, we digress.
Back to our point though, if you can convert them on your to your website, and then you can get them into your email list and engaging with your emails, then you almost are certainly going to be able to get them to at least listen to an episode of your podcast.
Yeah, exactly. Assuming that your content is relevant for them, which is always the assumption, and if it's not, then we don't want them on the email list anyway. We only want them there if what we talk about and do and help with and what we're experts on is relevant to them. So yeah, I always say, like, it's like all roads really should lead to your email, because then you can have, once someone's on your email list, you can have all kinds of conversations with them. Right.
Yeah.
So anyway, that's I could talk about that for hours. Like you said, I love that. But so the question of converting, like, how do we actually get people from Pinterest to do the things we want, is really
so that conversation could be an entire conversation in and of itself. But really, my way of doing this is to offer a lead magnet that I've talked about this in my lead magnet video here on YouTube. If you want more on that, you can definitely go check it out. But it's the next step after listening to the 7 ways to go grain-free in Italy podcast or whatever, whatever that is. What's our next step? How do we get them to then take action on that content? Well, if they just read what's in the podcast, the next step's probably not listening to the podcast. It's getting them onto our email list or to visiting the other links that we talked about.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, I do think that it is possible that someone finds you on Pinterest and, okay, let's say it this way. Someone finds you on Pinterest and maybe they're a reader, maybe they love podcasts. And those two things are not, sometimes people like both. Sometimes there are people, I mean, I've talked to people who are like, I hate podcasts. I just can't listen. My mind wanders, whatever. And then I've also talked to people who are like, I hate blogs. I can't read things. I have to have it in my earbuds. I have to be multitasking, whatever. So if someone finds you on Pinterest and they land on your show notes, they might actually, I think, skim the show notes and then hit play on the podcast and follow and then get it, especially if you really do a good job with the content and they're like, yeah, I want more of this content for whatever reason, whether that means it's really relevant to them, like that gluten-free thing in Italy, or you have really unique things to say and unique stories and they love your vibe and all those things. I think that's one path. But then another path, like you're saying, Heather, would be they just get the value from the show notes and then opt into your email list. And then later on, that gives them the opportunity, or you the opportunity, to be reminding them in your email of whenever you have new episodes. And that brings them full circle back around to the podcast episode. So I think it can happen both ways. But yeah, I mean, if I had my druthers and I could pick, I would always want them to, the highest priority would be to get them on the email list.
Yeah. And then if you get them on the email list, you can send them a content-led nurture sequence with all of your best podcast episodes related to that topic where they entered in from.
Yeah, that's a great idea.
Then you're nurturing them, you're building that trust, and you're getting them in, you're getting yourself into their ears.
I love that.
Remind me our dear follower's name over on Clubhouse. She's beautiful black lady with a black hat and she's wearing a red shirt. What's your name? cannot remember her name because on YouTube, it's not her actual name. What's your name? She says,
What's her
love
YouTube
podcast,
panel?
enhance Black women's health.
Oh, that's Tamisha.
Tamisha, I knew it was there.
I'm not looking at, sorry,
What
I'm
is
not
your
looking at the
name?
comments. Heather is. Tamisha. Hi.
Tamisha and Mimi are here. And
Yay, hi,
Tamisha says, I love
girls.
podcasts. I don't do those over an hour unless it's something I'm really interested to learn about.
That's interesting. Yeah.
And that's how I am too, Tamisha. I can relate to that. It has to be something short, sweet, to the point. I'm the same with YouTube videos. Super short, sweet, to the point, and I want to be able to extract that value out. I don't want to be listening to you rambling on for an hour.
Yeah. All that being said, I will say if you're a podcaster or a creator and you find yourself going into 45-minute videos, 60-minute podcasts, sorry, and especially if they're the interview style ones, because I know sometimes those can go a little longer too. That's another good reason, in my opinion, to have show notes, because people can land there, skim it, get the value, get on your email list. And then sometimes I really like it when people have longer episodes, if their show notes give me like time markers, so that if there is part that I really want to listen to, for example, let's say gluten-free Italy has gluten-free Florence at 6 o'clock or at 6 minutes in, and at 8 minutes in, it's gluten-free Venice, what I mean? Like, and I'm just going to one of those places just as an example to follow the same example. Show notes can also make things more digestible in that way too. So.
Mimi says, did you already go over what the pin would look like to direct people to your podcast? We're back. Actually, that's our next thing that we're going to talk about is creatives, Mimi. So, spoiler alert. That's it.
Okay, so I'm confusing myself about which question was from Julie and which one was from Mimi. I think I got them
Mimi
mixed
just
up.
asked Julie's question.
Oh, okay. Okay.
So
cool.
Mimi's reading Julie's mind.
Oh,
Julie
okay.
says, how detailed should pins be? And what should go in the caption is her follow-up. And then Mimi's question kind of pairs nicely. Did you go over what a pin would look like to direct people to your podcast?
That's awesome.
Would I just create an image that would tell people what the podcast episode covers, kind of like for a blog post?
Yeah. So just to keep everybody up to speed, we're on number 4 now, and Heather's going to talk about that, the creative part, and answer those questions. So this is fourth thing to know.
We oftentimes get questions as Pinterest strategists. What should our pins look like? Can we repurpose those little audiograms that we create? How do we make pins for our podcast? And really, ultimately, I always come back to basics. I look at anything that is complicated, like audiograms or short clips from like these YouTube lives that maybe you guys have seen me repurposing, as a 2.0 strategy rather than the 1.0 very basic. So when you are a podcaster, you're just getting started on Pinterest, I really don't want you doing the complicated stuff first, because I want you to build your skill set of finding keywords and writing titles and consistently scheduling your pins versus getting really complicated into, more advanced strategies. So I really like to just lean right back into the traditional Pinterest pin type. So if it's 4 ways to go gluten-free in Italy, the pin title or my text overlay, like a variation of it.
Yep.
What are your thoughts, Jana?
Yep, exactly. I don't have enough data myself anymore because I don't have any current clients. My current clients I don't have a lot of current clients because I do a lot more teaching and strategy now. But I have heard from people who work more with podcasters, because I've really only had a handful of clients, and I haven't had any in the last year, maybe 2 years, that have a current podcast. So I really can't speak to data. And you all who've been with us since Clubhouse know that we don't like to talk about things if we don't know or have our own data or experiences. So, but I have heard from other people, other Pinterest strategists in our community that have worked more recently with podcasters, that it still holds true that those audiograms are not really getting the best play on Pinterest. They don't seem to be getting a lot of distribution, grabbing people's attention, getting a lot of saves. So I personally, and in that blog post that I'm going to put in the notes of this video, I have some examples of pins that I created that go to podcast episodes. And they look, like you said, Heather, they really just look just like the other pins that I created for that brand. The only thing I do with some of them, and I like to just do both of these things so that we can see what works for what accounts, because different things work for different accounts and different audiences as well, and different niches, is I'll make some of them that are really very traditional Pinterest pin looking. And then I'll make others that are traditional Pinterest pin looking, but have like a little podcast logo, like a headphones, and say like, listen to the episode, or like episode 32, listen in, or listen to the podcast as the call to action or something like that. And I like to see how those perform too, because I think that letting people know what they're going to land on is a good idea. And that also, my strategy with that varies depending on how detailed the show notes are too. If you have detailed show notes, it might not be quite as important to do that. But if your show notes are just a transcript that's not easy to read, which is fine, some people do that, and I'm not, no shade, then maybe I would do that just so that people know when they land there that if they really want to consume and get the gluten-free tips for Italy, they're going to need to hit play and listen. So yeah.
And I do the same thing with YouTube videos. And then I'll also add a little bit of text to the description. If I'm sending it to a video, I'll say, watch the full video to get X, Y, and Z, or to learn X, Y, and Z. And I do that for blog posts too. Read the full blog post to learn X, Y, and Z. So you could also add in like, listen to the podcast.
Yeah. Now, if people already have those audiograms made though, like if they're just generating them from an AI software, there's some great ones out there that do that from podcast episodes, or if they're working with a podcast producer that automatically generates those and they're using them on Instagram, let's say, or something. Would you put those on Pinterest anyway, just to see how they perform? Or do you think you would say, don't do that, just make pins that are more Pinterest friendly?
I don't know how many people, and I would love to hear in the chat, are actually listening to audio on Pinterest. I think it has to have some captions on it at the very least.
So I think most of them do these days.
Read it. I don't know. I'd love to hear from the group though that are listening live what they would prefer. Do you need captions? Does it have to be a video? Would you listen to an audio based pin? I'm putting a phone to my ear like I'm 1999 here. Would you listen to just a Pinterest pin?
What do you know about 1999? How old were you in 1999?
Listen here, Jana, I was 10. Okay.
Okay, so you have seen the phones like that are like,
I grew up in the phones.
All right.
Even the ones with the cord and the rotary dialer, like we even had those. Okay.
Wow. Okay.
Mimi says she didn't even know Pinterest had audio. And I have a sneaking suspicion a lot of pinners don't know this, because from my understanding and my usage of the platform, audio is not automatically on.
Right.
You have to turn it on.
Right.
Well,
so
I think
it depends. I think it depends on your phone settings too. It's like if you have your phone on silent, right?
Yeah.
Wait, no, maybe not. I can't remember, but
no,
just the
I
fact that I
have
can't
to
remember
turn
is
it on.
Yeah, you still have to hit like the little, because normally like the default's going to be like the microphone with the X, and you'd have to tap it to, yeah. But I mean, if you think about like video pins and idea pins, you know, there's voiceover, there's music, so there's audio, but whether or not people are really listening, I mean, the visual has to stop the scroll. That's going to be the part that has to stop the scroll and get people to even make it larger on Pinterest. That's a pin click so that they would even listen to the audio. Yeah. Speaking of audio, you're on mute. There you go.
I muted myself because I went to search for something really quick. I didn't want my clicking to. Okay, so we have the blog post that we're going to drop in the description for your podcast show notes. We'll put that in the description of the video after we're done if anyone wants to go back and revisit that. And then I did mention a couple of things I will also include in the show notes for anyone that's looking for board strategy and just wants a quick rundown on what that looks like. I have a YouTube video on that. And then I did a full Pinterest for Podcasters YouTube video if you want a succinct, like short video to watch, to think through what this would look like for you. And then Jana has another blog post on her website that might be interesting too. I had already looked at it, your Pinterest for Podcasters blog post.
Yeah. I basically have two.
Yeah.
One is the Pinterest for Podcasters, and that like outlines like a step-by-step strategy. And then I have the one that's like how to make your show notes more Pinterest friendly.
Yeah. So if you want to read the Pinterest for Podcasters, Jana's blog, if you want to watch it, my YouTube video, and then we'll provide a couple of other resources. But I think
Word
that's
strategy video.
I think
you
that's
also
it.
mentioned toward the beginning, you also mentioned your lead magnet video as a
Mhm.
resource. So we'll make sure that's in there too.
Yeah. What else? Do you have any other final thoughts on Pinterest for podcasting?
I don't think so. Those are the 4 things that came to our mind that we think that you should know if you're thinking about this strategy. And, there's certainly more foundational things to learn.
Yeah.
And, we have resources that we'll link in the show notes if you want to learn the foundational things that are going to apply no matter what you are doing with Pinterest, basically.
Yeah.
Whether it's getting eyes and ears on your podcasts, getting eyes and ears on your blogs, getting eyes and ears on your paid offers, your digital products.
Right.
A lot of the same fundamental basics are going to apply for podcasters as well, of course.
Okay. Well, be sure to check out the show notes down below for anyone watching the replay, because we have lots of great resources for you. And let us know in the comments if you are a podcaster, we've reached you here on YouTube, and you are a podcaster and you've never considered Pinterest before. What's stopping you? We would love to know. Maybe it's you've never considered the platform, or maybe it's just too out there and you haven't had time. We would love to know. So let us know. Okay, I think that's it, Jana. I think we'll let you go.
Okay. See you next time, everybody.
Bye.
Bye.